Hi, and welcome to tonight's VCU Health virtual seminar on clinical trials and how these research studies help shape the future of cancer care. My name is Blake Belden, and I'm a member of the marketing and communications team at VCU Massey Cancer Center. Tonight, we will discuss how clinical trials assist in testing new methods to treat, diagnose. Tonight, we are joined by a great group of experts, including Dr. Robert Wynn, who was appointed director of VCU Massey Cancer Center in December 2019. In addition to directing the clinical and research activities at Massey, he is also the Senior Associate Dean for Cancer Innovation at the VCU School of Medicine, a pulmonologist, and a researcher at Massey. Dr. Wynn is committed to community-engaged research centered on eliminating health disparities. We are also joined by Dr. Harry Baer, the chair of the Protocol Review and Monitoring Committee, Interim Associate Director for Clinical Research, Walter Lawrence Jr., Distinguished Professor in Oncology, and member of the Developmental Therapeutics Research Program at Massey. He is also the chair of the Division of Surgical Oncology and a professor of surgery and microbiology and immunology at the VCU School of Medicine. We're also joined by Dr. Andrew Pacopovich, who is the medical director of the Clinical Trials Office, medical oncologist, and member of the Developmental Therapeutics Research Program at Massey. He is also an associate professor in the Division of Hematology, Oncology, and Palliative Care at the VCU School of Medicine. We will also be joined by Howard Reich, and he will provide a personal account of his participation in a pancreatic cancer clinical trial at Massey under the supervision of Dr. Pacopovich. We will also hear from Dr. Khalid Mateen, who serves as the interim chair of the Division of Hematology, Oncology, and Palliative Care, and a professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the VCU School of Medicine. He is also the contact principal investigator of the Minority Underserved NCI Community Oncology Research Program and the associate medical director of the Cancer Service Line at Massey. And last but not least, we will be joined by Sharon Dedru, who serves as the senior director of clinical operations and management for the Clinical Trials Office at Massey. Before we begin the presentation, I would first like to make note that we'll hold all questions until the end. Please feel free to drop any questions that you have into the comment section on Facebook, and we will try to address them in the Q&A at the end. So having said that, I will now open it up for Dr. Wynn.
Thank you, Blake. And I want to thank all of you for taking your valuable time and joining us tonight in really what I think is an incredibly important topic of clinical trials. The title, Paving the Way for New Cancer Treatments, is only part of this story. And I think what you'll hear tonight is the past. How do we get here? Where are we now? And more importantly, where are we going? I'd have to tell you that in my lifetime, particularly as someone focused on lung cancer and as well as other cancers, it has been a tremendous, amazing amount of progress has been made in a relatively short period of time. I have to be honest with you, in the beginning, when we used to think about clinical trials, just the word trials would just freak people out, like, oh my God, you're experimenting on me. We now know with good, solid evidence that people who are usually on clinical trials certainly typically have better outcomes at almost every marker than those who are even getting the standard of care. The truth of the matter is, I now see and am convinced, and hope that we will be able to convince you as well, that clinical trials are really a continuum of care. Although among you all, I'm pretty sure that I don't have to convince any of you of that. I would say that hopefully what we're hoping is by the end of the hour we get to spend with you, that you too are as excited as I am in the context of talking about trials to other people. Interestingly enough, although these trials have been readily available to most, the interesting thing is that we still have numbers of people who are afraid. And to be honest with you, I think rightfully so. When you're being told that you have the C word, and that is cancer, it can be incredibly scary. I don't need to tell many of you of that. The job that we hope we are doing, and I'm hoping that I can be a good servant leader in this context, is to make that big C cancer smaller, to make it more manageable. The reality is you're going to hear from Dr. Baer tonight, Dr. Smatine, Dr. Pacopovich, about the wonderful things that we're actually doing at the VCU Massey Cancer Center. Any advances. You're going to hear from Mr. Howard Reich about what it's like to be on a trial and hopefully, yes, get benefit from being on a trial. And you'll hear from someone who I really have a ton of respect for, Sharon Dedrew, who has the unenviable task of really doing what I call herding cats, and that is making the infrastructure to which all of the clinical trials run through, the clinical trials office, better. I don't want to take up too much of your time because you have a wonderful group that wants to impart knowledge on you, and I'm excited really to sort of hear them. But I did want you to know that VCU Massey is committed to not only the trials that we have now, but expanding, enhancing, and augmenting the trials and the number of trials we have available. Why? Because we know it works. Why? Because we know it actually benefits the generation after us. And why? Occasionally, sometimes it even benefits people that you don't have to even wait a generation for. I believe with all my heart and soul that we are on a great path. In fact, not only a pathway for new cancer treatments, but a pathway for really being in a world and having a future without cancer. That's my goal. That's my hope. And again, I just want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of really your schedule where you can actually make a whole lot of other decisions to be other places, but to be here with us. And I am confident that by the end, I think you will have learned a lot, but importantly, be as energized as I am and as we are as a team to go out there and really talk up the fact that when someone has cancer, it is not the end. So with that, I'm going to have the next voice, Dr. Harry Baer, come on and talk to you. By the way, I really have to say that Dr. Baer is a giant, and I know he will say no. He's a humble guy, but he's a guy that I not only have a lot of respect for, but has done a lot for this Richmond community and a lot for Virginia, and has been the consummate, not only surgical oncologist, but the consummate physician in the context of his ability to have impact and his caring for patients. So with that, Dr. Baer, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Wynn. We're certainly delighted to have you as our leader of the Massey Cancer Center. What I'd like to do is give a little bit of historical perspective on what clinical trials are all about, where they've come from, and where we've gotten to set the stage for the other speakers tonight. So until the second half of the 20th century, which is a long time ago now, most medical data really was not scientific data at all. It really was just an accumulated experience of a single center or a single surgeon or a single physician who basically said, you should do it my way because my patients do better than your patients, which really was not scientific. Let me have the next slide, please. And going more than 300 years back, or almost 300 years back, the first true randomized controlled clinical trial was actually conducted by James Lynn, who was a British surgeon on a Navy ship on the HMS Salisbury. And he was trying to figure out what was causing scurvy in the sailors and how he could prevent it. So he randomized 12 patients into 6 groups, 2 in each group, and he fed them each the list of concoctions you see there. And he determined quite quickly, next slide, that the citrus fruit cured the scurvy, and all the other remedies that people had tried in the past didn't work. And that's really the whole principle of doing randomized clinical trials, because if you don't know the answer, you can guess what the answer would be, but you don't always guess right. So clinical trials over the years have led to scientific advances that increase our understanding of tumor biology. It's allowed us to replace old, obsolete, ineffective treatments with better ones that increase survival, or maybe they have the same impact on survival but with less side effects. But it can take a long time to find out whether a new idea really works. Next slide, please. Back in the 70s, it took several large randomized clinical trials to change the standard surgical approach to breast cancer from total mastectomy to breast conservation with lumpectomy and radiation. And the first surgeons that advocated this and started those clinical trials were vilified by their colleagues at the time, that they were committing malpractice. And now we know that lumpectomy and radiation is just as effective as removing the breast. And for obvious reasons, it's preferable for patients. Next slide. But these things can take a long time. And this is an example of a clinical trial of adding trastuzumab, which is a monoclonal antibody against HER2, to the treatment of patients with HER2-positive breast cancer. And it's not a subtle difference, but the disease-free survival for patients who got Herceptin added to their chemotherapy in this trial, or actually two trials combined, was improved by almost 20%, which is huge. But it took a long time for us to get there. This was published in the New England Journal in 2005, and this was a trial that we participated in at Massey. Next slide. It took almost 25 years to get from the discovery of the HER2 molecule and what it meant to get to that result. So why should people participate in clinical trials, whether they're physicians or patients? Well, there's a personal satisfaction that we're improving the care for future cancer patients. Ultimately, it's an act of altruism. We're doing it for the next guy or the next girl, or the next lady, next man. Trials are still needed to translate exciting science into new treatments. Even when our science is based on brilliant discoveries, the hunches we make based on those discoveries can prove to be wrong. And we need to really determine for sure whether these ideas are effective in a clinical trial. And as Dr. Nguyen mentioned earlier, there's actually good objective evidence that patients who participate in clinical trials, regardless of which group they're in, whether they're in the control group or the group getting the new treatment, have better outcomes than patients getting routine standard of care off of the trial. Next slide, please. So next one, I introduce Dr. Andrew Pacopovich, who's in the Division of Hematology Oncology and one of our foremost early phase clinical investigators at the Massey Cancer Center. Andrew?
Thanks, Harry. All right, pleasure to talk with you all today. I'm going to be discussing one of the Massey clinical trials under the number 1207328. But what this was a phase 1 clinical trial of preoperative chemotherapy and chemotherapy with radiation with a collection of new drugs, gemcitabine, sorafenib, and brinostat, in pancreatic cancer. And what I want to highlight is the process that we came through to putting this trial together, the original ideas, treating the patients, coming up with the answers, and now moving forward. And this was a clinical trial with Massey Laboratories, our phase 1 program, which does the first types of trials with new drugs and new drug combinations, medical oncology, radiation oncology, and surgical oncology. Next slide. So what's the problem? Well, pancreatic cancer is one of the deadliest cancers that we face. We have limited treatment options and poor survival in cases of advanced disease. And in fact, if you look at the cancer statistics for 2020, almost 57,000 people will be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and almost 47,000 people will die of pancreatic cancer. Most people who catch this disease will ultimately succumb to it. And we certainly want to find ways for early detection. Those are not here yet where we can have it. So what we have to do is improve our treatment options. Currently, the only chance for a cure is through a surgical resection, along with chemotherapy and radiation in more advanced cases. And because there's no effective screening platform, many cases are diagnosed at more advanced stages when surgery is more difficult, if not impossible. Next slide. So the need was to identify a new approach to treat operable or potentially operable pancreatic cancers to improve the surgical success rate with the ultimate goal of improving the cure rate. Radiation is critical to the management of some pancreatic cancers, but we don't know the best way to dose the radiation and chemotherapies to get the optimal outcome. So there is opportunity here to improve. And Massey laboratories have been studying ways to enhance the effect of radiation and improve outcomes among many of their avenues of cancer research. Next slide. So the idea is this combination of sorafenib and vorinostat in pancreatic cancer. This is a Massey investigator by the name of Paul Dent, and he's been working with these molecules for quite some time, and he identified that they killed tumors of intestinal origin, whether it was colon or pancreatic or others, in a dose-dependent fashion, meaning if you dose this drug at higher doses, you will kill more cancer cells. And that effect was really enhanced by the addition of radiation. And so that led us to, during our meetings, coming up with the idea of testing this combination in pancreatic cancer specifically. Next slide, please. So the study design, so we gave patients chemotherapy up front, and then we did imaging, and then we proceeded with 3 agents given every single week during the course of radiation, which took approximately 6 weeks, followed by surgery. And then even in some patients, we had an additional clinical trial, something known as the SIVA sheet, where we were placing a specialized radiation delivery device in the surgical bed. So what our pancreatic cancer program then had was some of the most aggressive approaches with chemotherapy before radiation, radiation with multiple new drugs that have been identified in the lab to enhance radiation effects, and then the potential for additional postoperative radiation treatment through an additional clinical trial known as the SIVA sheet. Next slide. So here's one patient who went through this trial, and as you follow the blue line going up is bad. That tracks with cancer getting worse, and the blue line going down is good, with the cancer getting better. And this patient, during their chemotherapy, was getting the best drugs that we had, but instead their cancer was continuing to grow, which can happen with pancreatic cancer. And when they began our clinical trial, you can see those numbers drop dramatically during the course of the clinical trial. And you can see after they got through surgery, the levels go all the way down to essentially 0. And this is the kind of outcome that we look for, and this is what it's all about, right? It's finding agents that will help patients overcome a very difficult disease. Next slide. And so with that, I want to let you know about all those whose contributions were necessary for the success of this trial. We have our clinicians, we have our laboratory scientists, we have an enormous infrastructure within Massey Cancer Center dealing with the activation of protocols, the development of protocols and grants, the budgetary office, our institutional review board, our data safety and monitoring board, and our protocol review and monitoring committee. These things wouldn't be possible without donations to the Massey Cancer Center, which supports our mission for homegrown clinical trials coming out of the lab. And most of all, thanks goes to our patients, their families, and those that support them as they go through this journey. And with that, I'd like to introduce what this is really all about. This is Howard, and Howard was part of this trial.
How you doing, folks? So, Andrew, what would you like me to comment on here?
Now, what was the experience like for you with the way that things went from the approach to how you felt about the care that was delivered to you, sort of that really close-knit development you had with the research nurses and the study team and everything, from start to finish? Just walk us through your experience.
Yeah, well, first of all, I had some good fortune. I had AFib in about a year prior to me being diagnosed, and I was in the VCU system, and I was very fortunate to have a doctor who was inquisitive, cardiologist Phoebe Ashley, who was inquisitive, had a good bedside manner, and was thorough. And she was asking me questions about after I got treated for my AFib. She was asking me questions and follow-ups as to how I felt. And when I would tell her, different symptoms I was having, First of all, she was inquisitive to ask those questions. She said, that's not related to your heart. And finally, she ordered some tests. She ordered an MRI and a CAT scan. So I was very fortunate to have an inquisitive, thorough doctor in Phoebe Ashley. And in February of 2017, about a year after going through cardiac care, I was called and they said these tests unfortunately revealed that you have pancreatic cancer. But I was very lucky, as was said before, you usually don't catch it till stage 3 or 4. I caught it in stage 2. And then I did some interviewing, even though I was in the VCU system because I live in Richmond. I also sought the advice of UVA, a very fine doctor at UVA, who many people here probably know because I think it's a fairly small community. And I chose VCU because the surgeon that I interviewed at UVA basically looked at all my tests and said he had a great bedside manner and a very nice man. And he said, I don't know if I can get this. I don't know what your future holds. And then I went to back to VCU and I interviewed there. And the surgeon that was interviewing me was Dr. Barry Kaplan. And Barry Kaplan's a very direct man. And he says, I got this. And so he didn't have quite the bedside manner of this other gentleman, but I understand that, and I don't expect that. The doctors are scientists and especially surgeons. And I went with, my gut said, I'm going to go with the guy that's got a lot of, he's got a lot of confidence here. And so that's how I decided to go with the VCU program. And then I was in the trial, and I was in the trial, I assume, because of my age, because of it was stage 2. So that's how it kind of started.
Yeah, that's great. We certainly offer patients standard of care plus clinical trials. And the way I look at clinical trials, with all the advances we've seen against cancer over the last 10 and 15 years, it's an opportunity to try to do more, to take the best that there is and add more on top of that. And that's certainly one of the things that we were trying to offer with that trial by using standard chemotherapy, standard radiation, and adding additional drugs to that. Tell me about your thoughts as while you were on the trial, the day-to-day experiences that you had with the research team and the type of care that you felt you got from the clinical trials office.
Yeah. I think the care was very good. I think it was coordinated. The problem I have here is, for full disclosure, is my chemo brain lasted past my chemotherapy. So my memory's not great. But from what my wife has told me, I went through, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of chemotherapy and then followed up by radiation. Everything was very coordinated. Everything was, the doctors I spoke to each other. My main oncologist was Jennifer Myers, and she collaborated with Dr. Kaplan. And as far as I remember, everything was done well. The chemo made me very tired. I was very lucky because I had a job where every day I had something to do. And I think that's extremely important for a patient to keep themselves busy. But I was tired and I was pretty quiet. And from what I understand from my wife, and I'm a pretty social guy, I didn't really want to see anybody. But I remember the trial was well done.
Great. And tell us about how you're doing nowadays.
Well, the one thing the other thing I want to say is that when I was diagnosed with stage 2, and another friend of mine was diagnosed a year prior to me with stage 2, and he was at a fine institution. I'll leave their name out of it, but it's a very fine institution as well. And they operated on him first, and then did chemo and radiation, and he stayed at stage 2 for about a year, and then the cancer came back, and unfortunately passed away about 6 months ago. And his assistant, this gentleman was a very important man. His assistant always asked me, do you think if he had been in your trial, would things been different? And and you can't go there. you can't go there. But things are good. Things are good. I'm alive, so there's nothing better than that. I feel good, and I've been cancer-free, knock on wood, so far. And as you go through the trial, the first 2 years you're seen every quarter, and then it goes to 2 times a year in year 3, and that's where I am right now. It definitely, if you think about it, it makes you take a step back from things and look at life a little bit differently, which I have, but in a very positive way.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. I'm really sorry about your friend. I remember you talking about that when we were kind of going through all this back a few years ago.
Yeah.
There's certainly more to be done, and that's actually, what drives us. My goal is to have more and more people able to come back to me, catch up years later, and reminisce and talk about it. And that's the driving goal, to help the people in front of us and to help people that we never even meet, because that's the treatment that defines what's done tomorrow.
Yeah.
So thank you for everything that you've done.
No, well, hey, I was the patient. Thank you guys for everything you've done. You guys were the artists. I was the canvas, and I appreciate it very much.
Great.
All right, good evening, everyone. So for me today, I'm going to talk to you all about our minority underserved Encore. So I thought I'd start with explaining exactly what the Encore is. This is a program of the National Cancer Institute. It's the National Community Oncology Research Program. The way it stands right now, this particular program was started in 2014, but there has been precedence for this as it was started from the 1980s onwards as a way to really bring together the academic side of oncology and the community side of oncology, realizing that the majority of our cancer patients are actually out in the community, and we need to make sure that clinical trials reach patients beyond the academic institutes. There are 4 main areas that the NCI Encore program focuses on. One key area for clinical trials is for cancer control and prevention, a very key area as we look to obviously find treatments for early on and for better screening so we can prevent cancers, because that's really where we can make the biggest impact. The other part is accrual to active treatment clinical trials, what is called the NCTN clinical trials, where really we're looking at novel therapies, new drugs that are being developed, and incorporating them and making them into the standard of care for our patients with cancer. A third newer area of focus is cancer care delivery research, really seeing how the changes that we are making in cancer treatment, how that is optimizing cancer clinical outcomes, and looking at things such as, burden to the patient, burden to families, and the cost of treatment as well, which are all very important. And finally, the part that really is important for us at VCU is the incorporation of cancer disparities research, because we at VCU Massey Cancer Center are a minority underserved Encore, which means we have a specific interest in our minority underserved population. So these are our minority patients and our rural underserved populations throughout the state of Virginia. Next, please. This gives you an idea of how many Encore programs there are around the country. There are over 30 community-based Encore programs. Those are the ones in the blue circles. And then we are one of the minority underserved programs in the red triangle. And there's a total of 14 of them. And as you can see, these almost 50 programs around the country really help to deliver clinical trials throughout the country to parts of the country that may not have quick access to a big academic institute. Next, please. So what are the benefits to the community and beyond? So of course, most importantly, this brings access to latest treatment options for patients with cancer close to where they live. Because obviously, if you live 3 hours away from a cancer center, you're not really going to be able to travel on a weekly or an every monthly basis when you are already dealing with the cancer, the side effects from it, and the treatment. So really with this Encore program, we're trying to take the clinical trials out to the patients in the communities. Obviously, for physicians who live in the community and who treat patients there, it helps to attract and retain them in those areas, because they can really offer cutting-edge clinical trials to their patients and makes them feel good about what they're doing. Thirdly, it connects the community providers to a national cancer research network, which frankly, for a lot of community sites around the country, is very important. Also positions community practices to evaluate research questions within their own communities, even side effects, cancer survivorship, all things that are important. And finally, specifically again for us, it really provides us an opportunity for more diverse and representative population for the clinical trials. Really a population that really reflects the population of the country, so that we have a good balance of patients who we put on clinical trials. Next slide, please. And that brings me to really what our focus is, as I mentioned, a minority underserved Encore, focusing on our minority and underserved population here in the state of Virginia. It allows us to maintain a percentage of minority accrual to cancer treatment and cancer prevention studies. And VCU Massey as an Encore has consistently over the last decade been able to maintain between 20 and 30% minority underserved accrual to our clinical trials. This really enriches clinical trial accrual for us and for the Encore program by really making it better reflect the population of the country. It allows us to innovate and become nationally recognized. When you're only one of 14 minority underserved Encore sites, you really stand out and you become potentially leaders in that area. It gives us the potential to improve the standard of care for all of our patients, and it allows us to reach people who may not be able to reach us, which I think in oncology care is so important, because as patients, as I mentioned, are dealing with so much, we really don't want them to have to drive all the way to Richmond if we can really take the clinical trials out to them in rural Virginia. Next slide, please. This gives an idea of how important the minority underserved Encores are, the one in the solid blue. Really, despite the fact that there are only 14 minority underserved Encore sites out of almost 50 total Encore sites, we 14 accounted for more than half the minority accruals on those Encore clinical trials. So I think if you take the minority underserved Encores away, you're really not going to get as diverse of a mixture of patient population on these clinical trials, which helps shape the future of cancer care for everyone. Next slide, please. To give you an idea of VCU Massey's footprint with regards to the Encore, this slide basically shows you our affiliate sites, these are our community oncology partners around the Commonwealth of Virginia who are part of our Encore grant. And by that, we give them access to clinical trials in their communities. These insert on the left shows you the greater Richmond area, where we have us in Red Star. We have the McGuire VA, which is an affiliate sites, and also Virginia Cancer Institute with its satellite locations throughout the Richmond metro area. On the bigger green map, you can see that we are stretched out throughout the Commonwealth, as far north as Winchester, Fredericksburg, Lynchburg. We have an affiliate and our own basically site down in VCU CMH. And then recently we added on Riverside Oncology with its multiple affiliate sites around the Chesapeake Bay area. So really overall, we're able to cover a good proportion of the patient population of the state of Virginia, be it urban or be it rural, and also the minorities are included in these areas as well. Next slide. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Sharon Day-Drew, who is the Senior Director of our Clinical Operations and Management. Sharon?
Thank you, Dr. Mateen. Hello, everyone. So I will talk about the Clinical Trials Office and our relevance to clinical research. The Massey Cancer Center is a National Cancer Institute's or NCI designated cancer center. As such, it's committed to providing a centralized office that oversees and manages all clinical trials. Here at Massey Cancer Center, We call that enterprise the Clinical Trials Office. I'm the administrative head of the Clinical Trials Office, or the CTO, and I came to Massey in early part of 2020 after nearly 25 years as a clinical research professional. The CTO coordinates, as Howard mentioned, clinical trials. We facilitate, we progress clinical trials, and we report out on clinical trials. Next slide, please. We're an organization of nearly 90 people now with a variety of professional backgrounds and experiences. All of us are dedicated and committed to supporting the physicians, the clinical staff, and in particular, caring for the patient participants in clinical trials. Moreover, we're an added layer of support, as Pac mentioned, or Dr. Pacopovich. We add a layer of support to clinical trials participants. And next slide. There are a number of functional roles in this office. They can be categorized in two ways. The patient-facing, which would be to the left on the slide, the clinical research operational roles. That includes your clinical research nurses, clinical research coordinators, clinical data managers, as well as nurse practitioners. And then those people who would be in the center and far right columns, those non-patient facing. Those includes roles that are listed such as regulatory, our quality assurance, our quality control, the colleagues who activate the clinical trials, those colleagues who look at the budgets and finance for clinical trials and ensures that what needs to be paid is paid on behalf of the patient. We also include people who manage, as Dr. Mateen has mentioned, networks, a number of national networks and cancer research networks such as the Encore and others. Next slide, please. So this is a depiction of, in this hub and spoke model, of the combination of what happens for a participant in a clinical trials. We'd like to think, because a patient chooses to participate in a clinical trial, the CTO plays a supportive role and enhances their normal and standard clinical care. We help the patients through every aspect of the clinical trial, every visit, every follow-up, and we hope that we play a part in improving the outcomes for many clinical trial participants. We do that by adding this extra layer. If you look at this hub and spoke, the larger circles are what a patient would receive and encounter in their standard clinical care outside of a clinical trial. Once a patient decides to participate in a clinical trial, they are enhanced with a number of other interactions due to the clinical trials office, the clinical research nurses, working with the clinical staff and physicians, the coordinators and finance and regulatory, working with the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, or the ethics committees, the FDA, as well as pharmaceutical companies and other organizations. Next slide, please. Clinical Trials Office ensures that the study team knows the trial participants' history and is actively involved in support and care of the participants with the physician's leads. The nurse or the coordinator is available to answer questions and address issues before, during, and after a trial is completed. Participants in clinical trials at Massey can be assured that when they choose to take part in clinical trials, they gain an added layer of support an added layer of care, an added layer of oversight, and more importantly, comfort and solace due in a small part to the clinical trials office. Next slide, please. In closing, I'll just say if you're interested in learning more about clinical trials, and the number of clinical trials we currently have at Massey Cancer Center is well over 100, and we are working diligently, as Dr. Wen has alluded to expand that portfolio so that we can make more innovative treatments available to needed patients. If you're interested in learning more, there's the website, email, or phone number that you can contact us at. Now, I guess I'll open it up for questions for the panel. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you all for your different presentations on your different pieces as they regard clinical trials at Massey. We're going to now open it up for any questions. First, we had a few submitted in advance, so I'll read those. And then we will address any questions in the comment section. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to type them into the comments on Facebook, and we will try to get to those. So first question, and I'll kind of allocate these, but if you feel like there's a different, better speaker for each question, feel free to speak up. We have, let's see, I'll go to Dr. Wen for this one. What are the possible risks of participating in a clinical trial, and how can I determine if the benefits outweigh the risks?
But I was going to actually throw this one back to my team.
I'm happy to take that one on. I think when it comes to any clinical trial, you want to have a really detailed discussion with your provider and the research team. And what we do at Massey is we make sure we discuss it in detail, look at all the, potentially what the benefits are, what the side effects may be, give you a detailed consent form to take home with you that you can read over, discuss with family members, and contact us with questions. And I know our research team is wonderful about being approachable, that as questions come up and getting back to you so that you ultimately reach a decision that you're comfortable with. And I'd say that's really the bottom line. I'm happy to have anyone else, maybe especially Sharon, maybe add something.
Dr. Bear is raising his hand.
Dr. Bear?
So I think it's important to understand, actually, it's a good opportunity to talk about the different phases of clinical trials, which have sort of different risks and different potential benefits. We have what we call phase 1 trials, which the easiest way to explain those are first in human, a new drug being tried for the first time in a group of patients, sometimes with one disease, sometimes with many different types of cancer. The idea usually being to determine the safety and the right dose of the drug to use. So that probably has a little higher risk level and maybe less benefit. In a phase 2 trial, we have a pretty good idea that a drug is going to be effective against a cancer, although we think it will, and we test it in a group of patients that are fairly similar to one another to determine whether it really has activity. And since we've done the studies to look at the side effects and the dose levels that are appropriate for human beings, those trials are a little bit less risky and the benefits more uncertain. But the next level of trials we call phase 3, and that's when we do prospective randomized trials where the new treatment is compared to the standard of care. It's either added to the standard of care or replaces something that doesn't work that well. And by that point, we have a pretty good idea what the risks are, and we explain them in detail to the patients. And there's a very high likelihood that by that time that the new treatment will be beneficial, although not always. Sometimes randomized trials show no benefit, but it's unlikely that the new treatment in the phase 3 trial is going to be any worse or any less effective than the standard of care.
All right.
And I think I would just simply add to that I think we're all acutely aware now of trials. I mean, this whole COVID crisis, I think people were probably, maybe walking on a cloud, didn't know unless it personally affected you. But I think everybody knows the power of trials and the potential power of benefit. In fact, I like to sort of say that sometimes I think trials are certainly experimental, but you know, the reality is I believe in some cases our trials have not only put forth new knowledge, but saved lives. I mean, I think of our checkpoint inhibitors that we have now, and think that was directly related and has had a huge impact on many people in their outcomes. So definitely risk benefit. And I was thinking that, you know, I was sitting there, but I wouldn't put him on the spot. But I was thinking, Howard, man, I would really sure like for you to actually sort of talk about how you actually were thinking about the risk benefit for your trial. But I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Well, like I said, you know, unfortunately, you know, my chemo brain lasted is still there. But you know, I certainly I know that. And my wife is a lot smarter than I am, and gets into the scientific side of things. Exactly, that's pretty true. So no real knowledge there, but you know, we asked a lot of questions, and I know we would have done that, and we would have asked, you know, what are the pluses, you know, what are the challenges, and we would have gone back and forth on that, and you know, and weighed that out. But like I said, you know, the initial, you know, the confidence of, you know, one of your surgeons meant a lot. And I'm sitting here talking to you. So if you talk about a trial working, and I understand I was, I think, number 4 in the trial, and I understand the 3 people that preceded me are like myself. They're somewhere talking. So yeah, so far so good. This one's working.
Yeah. And a lot of the things that, you know, have come to light over the last few years with some of the modern treatments is that we've actually been able to improve outcomes with improved side effect profiles. There are going to be some risks because we're dealing with dangerous diseases and we use dangerous drugs. But with the oversight that Sharon was describing, with that sort of really close care, you have the ability to have any side effect caught very early because you're watched so closely. And the diseases we deal with are dangerous. So there's been a lot of advances both in side effects as well as outcomes, just like Dr. Wynn was describing.
Dr. Pacopovich, I'll kind of let you take this next question too. And I'm sure it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but our next question is, if I'm on certain medications prior to my participation in a clinical trial, can I continue taking those while I participate?
So that's the type of thing that comes specifically from the discussion about a particular trial with your doctor. So there are what we refer to as concurrent meds, or medications that you're taking at the same time. And we all know that too many medications, you can run into an interaction. But there are certain things, as an example, that if you take an acid-suppressing drug, like Nexium, that your body can't absorb the chemotherapy pill as well as if you weren't taking Nexium. So if the trial says you need to watch out for this medication, we will bring it up to you. And we walk through it, and we actually often will have alternatives. Oh, this medicine can't be taken, but that medicine can because of how it impacts the metabolism of another drug. So yeah, we take all of that into consideration prior to developing the trial.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that it's important as a participant in a clinical trial or even otherwise getting treatment, please make sure you let your provider team know what medications you're taking. So whether it's supplements, vitamins, anything, it's important to make sure that the team is aware, because as Dr. Pacopovich mentioned, there could be interactions or there could be potentially reduction in the effectiveness of the treatment. So you have to make sure that your team is aware of what you're taking and how often.
Okay. Sharon, maybe you'll be good for this one. Is there a cost to being on a clinical trial? And if so, will health insurance cover it?
So there is a cost to everything, as we know. So yes, there's a cost to clinical trials. However, as I alluded to, we have a group within the CTO, that the clinical trials office, that helps to oversee and ensure that the cost that your insurance should pay, they pay. And the cost, if we are collaborating and partnering with a pharmaceutical company they take on that. And there are times that, yes, some standard of care treatments, those may end up having some payment from the patient. But for the most part, what happens is the CTO, research finance, and contracts group ensure that we've looked at every detail line by line to ensure that it's paid.
Okay. Our next question, Dr. Baer, I'll leave this one to you. Some clinical trials use placebos. Are placebos used in oncology trials?
Well, the simple answer to that is sometimes. Particularly if a drug is an oral medication, it's likely that the pharmaceutical company or whoever the sponsor is will produce a set of pills that looks like the pills that are the active drug. If it's an intravenous drug, that's less likely to be a placebo or intravenous infusion of saline. But yeah, sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. It depends on the type of trial.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to comment to that is a placebo is only used when there is no additional standard of care medication to be given. So what you would be offered is the standard of care treatment as the control arm or the placebo arm, or the standard of care treatment plus something. As an example, we have this chemotherapy that's very effective in lung cancer, and we're trying to find out if this chemotherapy plus this other drug is more effective. Everybody is going to get the chemotherapy drug that we know is effective. Half the people will get the new drug, the other half of the people will not, but you're not getting less care than you would get outside of a trial. Yeah. And sometimes if there's a placebo that is offered and some people get treatment alone, it is because there is no treatment for a disease. Mm-hmm. Somebody has surgery for a cancer, and we don't offer any therapy normally because drugs haven't been shown to help anybody be cured by any drugs that have come to date. So if the current standard is we're just going to watch you and see if it comes back, but now we have a promising new drug, that one might have a placebo control. But there will never be a placebo that is less than the best standard of care to date.
Yeah,
that's an important
part of the reason for using placebos is to assess the side effects of the new drug, because it's amazing how often patients have side effects. They may have side effects from the standard of care drug, and if the percentage of patients who have the same side effect are identical in the placebo group, then we know it's caused by their standard care and not by the new drug.
All right. Sean, I might direct this one back to you.
Okay.
How will my medical information and privacy be protected while I'm participating in a clinical trial?
Excellent question. So the CTO makes every effort to ensure that personal health information is remained confidential. When you're on a clinical trial, many of the data that is included in case report forms and the data capture is entered in a way that is de-identified so that patients' personal information is not included in the collection of the clinical trials information. Additionally, only those people, the clinical research team, the physicians, the clinical staff who need to see the data are allowed to see the data and the patient's personal information. So we make every effort to keep confidential patient's information. I will say also, sometimes when people participate in clinical trials, they want to know what happened afterwards. Mm-hmm. They want to know the outcome. And so, and I just mentioned to you, we de-identify the information. So if you want to know the outcome will be a aggregate. We won't be able to pull out information because remember, we de-identified it. So we do make every effort to follow patients and ensure that if they want to know the end result, publications, etc., that is made available to them as well.
I do think that that's one area we could be better about. And I know that this question, is about privacy, but I think that as a designated NCI designated cancer center, one that really believes that information is important, we should be able to say at the end of the trial, this is what happened. And once we actually kind of get all that data back to have town halls, I think one of the things I'd like to do, and I know these guys are probably hearing it for the first time and they'll probably want to strangle me, but I think, I think that, having a town hall or two every, once or twice a year, and just giving people updates. This is what your trial was. And at the end of the day, this is the benefit we saw in it, would actually, I think, be helpful. But again, I think that I'm going to be getting information from the community, whether they think that that would be helpful or not. But I do think the dissemination of information so that it doesn't look so mysterious, that we all have the data, and that maybe if you know how to go on PubMed or one of these other things, that you can then get the information. I think we should make this easier for people within our communities, because we should celebrate our successes, but we should also be transparent with a couple of trials that we said, gave it a good shot. We met some markers, but it didn't do X, Y, and Z. I don't know how others feel about that. We'll likely wind up having discussions about that. But having a couple of these town halls now virtually, I think makes it easier for us to be able to have and reach you all to say, hey, this is what we really are excited about. And, it may have been a couple of years ago that you participated or someone else you love participated, but you could say, this drug is working. I think that's important info.
Yeah, I must say that some of the cooperative groups are pretty good at that. Over the years, for the clinical trials that I've been the site PI for, I've written a lot of what we call Dear Participant letters.
Yes.
When the data are released and published, and we send a letter over my signature to all the patients who participated from our site. And sometimes we tell them which group they were in, and sometimes we tell patients which group they're in early. If it's such a big effect that we think patients who are in the placebo group maybe should be crossed over because the benefit is so great. That doesn't happen very often. I wish it happened more often.
No, I agree. This is a good way of giving feedback to people from the community who took part. So as data is presented at national meetings and published otherwise, we should be going back and being more open with our community here and with our community partners around the state to update them on what results have been.
And the wonderful part about being an NCI designated, and I think that we're going to also do a better job, and I promise, as a cancer center, we're going to do a better job at letting you know what the little blue sign that says NCI mean when you see it. There's only 71 of these designated cancer centers around the country. Roughly about almost coming up on the 50th anniversary, they were created to do exactly what we're talking about tonight. A partnership between the federal government and academic institutions to really draw upon the best of all of us so that we can actually have these miracle drugs. Now, the truth of the matter is pharma is also making some progress, but a lot of these things are actually happening on our campuses. For example, something called Investigator-Initiated Trials. Those are things that are happening right here at Massey that if, they go through the pipeline, if they wind up working and coming in clinical trials, we should let you know. And so we're going to be working harder and making sure that you know that we're not just a cancer center, but we also are a cancer center that's actually designated. And we love working with our partners throughout all of the region. The nice part about being in Virginia is that while you may have two designated cancer centers, you have a number of other places like, VCI and others that, oh man, we love working with them. And bringing and expanding the network of clinical trials for people within our state. That's why we're here.
Great. I think that's a good way to close. I think we've hit our hour. I want to thank all of you for participating in this important discussion in this VCU Health seminar on clinical trials and the work that Massey is doing to make strides in cancer research, treatment, and care. To anyone out there who wants to learn more about the physicians who joined us tonight, you can visit vcuhealth.org. And to stay connected and up to date on any advances in cancer research at Massey, you can follow at VCU Massey Cancer Center or visit www.masseycancercenter.org. Once again, thank you to all of our panelists who joined us tonight and to anyone who joined us online. And I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.